And we're back. Welcome to the 31st edition of the eDuck podcast. I'm Robby Boydston, and from Eugene, my co-host, Eric Scopel. Eric, how you doing?
Pretty good. I understand there's like something going on with the BCS or something?
Yeah, I think the standings or something came out and people are up in arms or something that happens, I believe, every week. But that was pretty much the reason why we held off on the podcast until now, because we kind of sensed that this would be a little bit more fun if we waited until the BCS standings came out. If you haven't seen them yet, Oregon slips back to number 3 behind Florida State after their win over number 7 Miami last night, a big win in Tallahassee, thus reigniting the debate for which team is the second best team behind Alabama in the nation. Eric, what are your initial thoughts on this, and is this really a shock?
Robby, did you watch the show?
Did I watch the BCS show? Yes.
Yeah, I didn't. I was actually buying a hamburger at the time because I really don't think this matters at this point in the season. We've talked about it before. Oregon's schedule is better than Florida State's going forward, so unless there is a mass exodus of voters that decide to go the Seminoles' way, Oregon will play in the national championship. I think that's pretty definite. Right now, Florida State actually holds the advantage in large part because they have the highest computer rankings, which will, of course, change here as their schedule finishes off much worse than Oregon and Alabama's do. While Oregon is a kind of a backloaded schedule here, you just kind of look at who Florida State plays. They play Wake Forest, Syracuse, Idaho, and Florida from here, while Oregon, of course, plays Stanford, Utah, Arizona, Oregon State. And, of course, there will be a conference championship game for both sides. Oregon figures to play either Arizona State, USC, or UCLA, while it looks like it could be a rematch between Virginia Tech and Miami with Florida State.
Well, and let's not get too far ahead, because Oregon still has a huge test against Stanford, which, if they fail, would put Stanford back up top there for the North. They would give them the whole shot for the North in terms of possibly playing in that Pac-12 title game. But you bring up an interesting, point there with the fact that there's the backloaded schedules. We've talked about that quite a bit, and also the fact that Virginia Tech, if you look at the ACC, seemingly getting in its own way, you'd think that Florida State playing a team they hadn't played previously, maybe if Virginia Tech would have been able to get on some sort of a roll, they would have looked a little bit better should those two teams face off in the conference title game. It looks at this point Florida State is a formality. I think I agree with you there. But, with Virginia Tech losing to Duke and it looking like Miami, should they win out, gets that rematch with Florida State. I mean, do you expect to see anything different? I think it's kind of fun to hypothesize on what would happen if those two teams played again. And is Florida State just too good, or would Miami be able to maybe figure out something defensively to maybe shock the Seminoles and make this less of a debate between Alabama, Oregon, and Florida State?
No, Miami would lose. And I say that pretty confidently just because Miami's best player, Duke Johnson, was actually broke his leg last night and is out for the season, so that kind of takes away their offensive. And you saw that in the second half, that when he went out, he really started off hot for them and kind of opened things up in the passing game. Their first touchdown was a play-action pass, which was actually a really nice throw from Stephen Morris. But without him, I just don't see them really competing with Florida State. And really, again, I think this season will come down to Oregon more than it'll come down to Florida State. I don't think the Seminoles will be challenged much this season, barring significant injuries or maybe if they just kind of totally lose focus and drop a game against a team they shouldn't lose to. So, yeah, I mean, that's my perspective. I really just don't see a scenario where Miami gets good enough, especially with that injury yesterday, to really compete with Florida State in a potential rematch.
And you look at Oregon's schedule now, while they did make a point on the BCS show to say that Oregon will be playing teams down the stretch with winning records while Florida State won't. It seems like that schedule's taking just a little bit more of a hit, and I really kind of direct more towards Utah, with their recent troubles over the last couple of weeks. And not only that, Oregon State, who played tough against Stanford, not exactly sharp, but then this week on Friday night getting throttled at home by a USC team. I don't know if, I didn't think that was going to happen. I don't know what your thoughts on that were, Eric, but you take a look at this. Does it make Duck fans a little bit more confident looking at their schedule and knowing that these teams are kind of going on a slide, in Oregon, should they get by Stanford, will be hitting them probably at the right time?
Well, going back to the rest of the Pac-12, they're not doing Oregon any favors right now, and mostly I direct that to USC, who has beaten Utah and Oregon State the past 2 weeks, two teams that Oregon, who figured to be pretty good computer resume teams for Oregon. Of course, Oregon State probably expected to lose to Stanford, wasn't expected to lose to Eastern Washington, but USC felt like a game that was very winnable for the Beavers, and for them to lose that game was not a good thing at all for Oregon. Looking forward there, Arizona State doing well would be bad. I mean, basically, the only way USC or Arizona State having a good finish to this second half of the season is if they somehow end up playing Oregon in a conference championship game. Now, I will say I'm not overly concerned about the way the rest of the conference breaks down, because I think Stanford probably gives Oregon a nice shot in the arm there to jump over Florida State, and frankly, Florida State doesn't play. I don't think anybody else on the Florida State's remaining schedule is significantly better in terms of their computer profile than anybody that Oregon is playing. So Oregon takes care of business against Stanford, and you got to figure that they jump Florida State, and that Florida State doesn't have enough left on the schedule to jump back over Oregon.
Don't look past the Vandals, man. You cannot overlook Idaho. I'm telling you, that's going to be a tough game for Florida State.
That's totally serious, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, of course I am. They're obviously the superior team in that state as well. But let's now kind of shift gears to why this becomes so important. The game of the week in a week that really is going to feature three very impressive matchups, two of them happening simultaneously on Thursday night. One of those games is Baylor versus Oklahoma, and I don't think many people saw that being a game of the year type of matchup at the beginning of the year, but that's what you're getting. And of course, Oregon-Stanford, which I believe has been on everybody's mind since last spring. So we look at Oregon-Stanford, the big matchup's finally here. Last year, of course, Stanford shocking Oregon, dashing their national title hopes with a 17-14 overtime victory in Eugene. This year, Oregon going back to the farm where they won 2 years ago. But both teams really, Stanford still hypothetically in contention for the national title, being the top one-loss team. You never know what's going to happen down the stretch. Both teams playing for control of the Pac-12 North. It really doesn't get much bigger than this, and this is what you expected at the beginning of the year. What are your thoughts on this going forward, Eric? And I'm curious, does Stanford having one loss make this a little bit more intriguing, given the fact that they're maybe a little bit more of an underdog, or does it lose a little bit of its luster given that they lost to Utah earlier in the year?
Yeah, what I was going to say, actually, Robbie, is that the only way this could have theoretically been a better matchup is if Stanford had also taken care of business, and then we might have quite the discussion on our hands right now going into this game about how this is kind of a play-in for the national championship game. There would be then probably 4 teams that are legitimate BCS championship contenders. I understand that Baylor and Ohio State are still undefeated and very much alive in kind of that secondary discussion if one of those other teams falters. But Stanford, had they beaten Utah, would be, probably. I'd be very interested to see how that would have affected the voters and the computers, and where that kind of would have, figured itself out. So, but of course, that's not reality. So we won't stay there too long, even though I like to hang out in, outside of reality as much
Unreality.
as possible. But yeah, unreality, bizarro world, Eric. This is going to be a really interesting game, and having spoke with Coach Aliotti and Coach Helfrich today, the reason Stanford gives Oregon and frankly the rest of the conference so much trouble is because they play a totally different style of football.
Right.
Aliotti said something, and the exact I don't remember the exact quote, but something to the effect of, Stanford was really smart to kind of stick with the style they're playing, because while there's this huge transition towards playing spread offense, the Cardinal kind of actually turned the pages back and kind of went back to, what was successful in the 90s with some of those Oklahoma and Nebraska teams where they just kind of pound it on you. And Stanford will play 2-3 tight ends. They'll play 2-3 extra offensive linemen sometimes. So that's going to be a challenge. And Helfrich said that, just for the scout team perspective, preparing for Stanford is extremely difficult because they don't even have the bodies really to throw 9 offensive linemen out there on the same formation. And so that's difficult to simulate in practice. So they're kind of going to have to, I think he said, trust their system and kind of trust what they're all about. But there's a certain sense of you can't really prepare for Stanford until you see them on the field, and then hopefully you're in good enough shape to manage. So it'll be very interesting. Frankly, I don't think, to me that this game comes down less about what Stanford is able to do offensively and more about what Oregon is able to do offensively against Stanford's defense. Frankly, I think if Oregon is able to score half of what they score on a weekly basis, I think they're going to be fine because Oregon is averaging about, let's say, 56 points a game. If they score 4 touchdowns, which is the equivalent to 28 points, I just don't see Stanford's offense from what I've seen this season and from what I've seen from Oregon's defense putting up enough points to be able to stay with Oregon. If Oregon scores 28 points, I think they'll be fine. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. I think that's kind of where, not just regionally but nationally, the eyes are going to be down in Palo Alto on Thursday, and it's going to really come down to that matchup between Oregon's offense and Stanford's defense.
And let's talk a little bit more about that, just given the fact that over the last couple of weeks, both Washington State and UCLA were able to find some kinks to get that Oregon offense a little bit disrupted. You saw it more really during the UCLA game when it was tied at 14 going to halftime. But to give the Cougars credit, they were able to force some turnovers. At least in my opinion, though, he's been playing fantastic, and it's really hard to nitpick anything he's been doing. Marcus Mariota, Oregon's quarterback, has struggled at times in the last couple of games and maybe not been as aware as we're used to seeing him. While Palo Alto is not a very intimidating environment, and that's not to take a shot at Stanford, but do you think that there's an opportunity for Stanford to jump on Marcus Mariota early, get him out of his rhythm like they did last year, and maybe be able to grind this thing down, even if that means holding Oregon to 28 points instead of 17? And do you think Stanford has the offense to counter that and to put up possibly 30 points?
No, and that's kind of what I was just saying. I don't think Stanford. If Oregon scores 28 points, I feel like they'll be fine. And to kind of mimic and repeat what Nick Galeotti said today, if he feels like if his defense can hold Stanford to 17 like they did last year, mm-hmm. He thinks the offense is going to be fine. I think offensively there were so many mistakes made. I mean, one that stands out to every Oregon fan, of course, is DeAnthony Thomas running side by side with Marcus Mariota and almost treating it like a sprint competition where they're trying to beat each other to the end zone rather than pick up the Stanford defender who eventually tackles Mariota and negates what would have been an 80-plus yard touchdown. So, that was just one of many mistakes that that Helfrich talked about a little bit today during his media conference, and really just saying that we didn't give Stanford our best shot last year. This is going to be an opportunity to do that, and he thinks they're going to be ready on Thursday. So it will be very interesting to see that matchup, and I think you bring up a good point there. Marcus didn't really rise to the occasion last year, and of course the hype on that game was a little bit different than this year. Last year, Stanford was 13th in the country. Oregon was second, and really just a couple of games away, it appeared, from playing in the national championship game. And really, not that Oregon was distracted, but it felt like a situation where, the expectation was Oregon should win this game and win fairly easily, the way that the season had gone for both sides. And this year, I think it feels a little bit differently. Obviously, with it being 2 versus, or I guess 3 now versus 5. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be one thing to really, so much is made about Marcus and being a Heisman Trophy candidate. This will be an opportunity to really rise to the occasion like he wasn't able to do last year and hopefully lead Oregon to a win.
Well, and I'm looking here at the last year's stats, and something that does stand out is, and just to bring it back a little bit to what Kevin Hogan was able to do last year, really actually did outperform Mariota, at least step for step was with him, 25 of 36 for 211 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. You look at Mariota, 21 of 37, 207 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And then you look at really what they were able to do on the ground. And you look at a guy like Stephen Taylor, who had 161 yards last year, and that's a big factor. Oregon really seems to kind of get out of their rhythm defensively if the other team can get a successful running game going against them. And really, that's what Stanford really was able to do last year and pounded out on the ground. The difference, I think, here is that you look at who led the game receiving for them last year, Zach Ertz, who's now playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. And you look at Stanford really kind of relying a lot on a guy like Ty Montgomery this year. Oregon really already knows which targets they need to neutralize. And I think you look at Stanford's depth offensively, and maybe it didn't look the same last year going into the game, like you mentioned, with them being only 13th, and maybe they just weren't taken as seriously of a threat. But I'm looking at this, and depth-wise, especially when you factor in how Byron Marshall's been playing for Oregon, Thomas Tyner becoming a weapon, whatever the status with DeAnthony will be at that time, and the fact that the passing game has developed a lot more over the past year, you really see like there's a lot more weapons for Oregon to utilize as opposed to Stanford for what they had last year. It seems like almost they're a little bit more limited.
Oh, no doubt about that. And Oregon will probably pose, well, and this is for just about anybody that's playing Oregon, but Oregon will pose the best dual threat offense that Stanford has faced to this point. And you just kind of look down Stanford's schedule here, and the best offenses they've faced. Oregon State last week, one of the best, if not the best, pass offenses this year has no running game. Mm-hmm. Washington State, who they beat handily, the exact same thing, no running game. Washington, Utah, and UCLA, who are the three teams that played the Cardinal the best, all have fairly decent running games to go along with passing games. I think Utah, who was the lone team obviously to beat Stanford, probably has the worst running game of that group. But Oregon is going to challenge them many ways, and frankly, Stanford I don't think has the athletes to do that, at least in the passing game. I mean, Hogan this year is probably more of a liability throwing the ball if you just look strictly at his numbers. And running the football is kind of where he might give Oregon some troubles, but not in designed runs, more in scrambles. But his QB rating this year has not been good. He was very poor last week against Oregon State, completing just 8 of 18 passes for 88 yards. Of course, Oregon State does have one of the better pass defenses in the conference this year, has forced a lot of turnovers, but also didn't throw well against Utah, 15 for 27 yards. Against Washington was 12 for 20. And Washington State 16 for 25. So he's thrown over 50% in all but 3 games. But the 3 games he hasn't thrown over 50 are the games that have been really competitive here. So it'll be interesting to see how Oregon's defense, which is considered, especially that secondary, one of the best in the country, to see how they try to neutralize him and maybe force them to beat them on the ground, which is a place that try to force them to beat them through the air, which is a place that Hogan has been somewhat susceptible this year.
All right, well, let's get into the prediction of this game, and then kind of segue into the Pac-12 predictions. We obviously didn't get to do any of them for this past week's game because we were off, but what do you think? Oregon-Stanford, let's start there. I think we're both in agreement. We think Oregon's going to win there. Would you like to throw the first score out this week?
Yeah, because I think last week I let you do the honors, so I will go ahead and give my best score here. Like I said, I think if Oregon is able to score even half of what they average, they'll be in pretty good shape. The Cardinals this year have obviously done an excellent job defensively with their opponents. The most anyone has scored was the 28 points that were scored by both Arizona State and Washington. Utah also scored 27. I think Oregon, having seen Washington, up close against Oregon, I think Oregon's offense is better than Washington. So, and I know that it's hard to make those comparisons and try to make any predictions based off of them, but if we're using that theory at all, I'm going to go ahead and say Oregon outscores what Washington was able to do, and I think they score 5 touchdowns and go for 2 at the beginning. They don't get it and kick a field goal, so I'm going to take them 37 to 20.
Okay, yeah, I had them at 5 touchdowns as well. I was not going to go with the 2-pointers factor in all of that. I'm going to take them at 35. I'm going to say Stanford's able to put 24 on there. I think that game remains close. Maybe Stanford gets a late score when the game's, I think, probably a little bit out of reach. Maybe they're trying to scramble to maybe make it a 1 or 2 possession game. But I expect it to be close in the first half. And then in the second half, I just think Oregon's offensive weapons, just they're able to work down Stanford, work the lack of depth they're having right now, and the fact that Oregon really does seem like they can throw everything, the kitchen sink and more at you, and it's kind of a never-ending barrage as you see these teams that are competitive for a half and then come in and just can't keep up in the second half and really feel, the weight of that Oregon offense on them. So I'll go with that score. We both have Oregon in that game. Let's work down the schedule. You got 4 other contests in the Pac-12 this weekend. We'll start 12 o'clock start on Saturday. USC, winners of 2 straight now, going up against Cal, a 1-8 Cal team in Berkeley. Eric, I mean, the way USC's been playing, they're gaining a little bit more momentum. Cal has beaten Portland State, so I guess you can hang your hat on that. I think this looks like a pretty academic win for the Trojans as long as they don't make too many mistakes. Would you agree with me?
Absolutely, and you forgot to mention that they did beat Portland State by 7 points, so they really took it to the Vikings in that game. So that has to be factored in here in the predictions. Yeah, I mean this could be extremely one-sided. I mean USC, who I think we had, at least on this podcast, had kind of written off to a certain extent, has actually looked really, really good under Ed Orgeron so far in the games he's coached. Their defense has been awesome all season. Their offense seems to be getting into a little bit of a rhythm, especially against Oregon State. They actually looked pretty good. Some semblance of consistency and balance, actually, against the Beavers, which I don't know if that's more about USC or more about Oregon State. But, yeah, I definitely – you can't not take – there's a double negative for you. You cannot not take USC to beat California, so I'm going to take them to win 42-7.
All right, I'll say they keep it a little bit limited on the ground. I am going to go back to my 5 touchdown prediction, like I said in Oregon. I'll say it's a 35 to. I got to agree with you that I don't think they're going to score much. I'm going to say 10 just to be different. But we'll move on now to the next game, 1 o'clock start out in Utah. The 4-4 Utes come home to take on a hot Arizona State team that is still trying to play for position in that Pac-12 South, really trying to take that division and have a good chance if they have a nice run down the stretch here. You got to imagine Arizona State's going to be the more motivated team, but with Utah having lost a couple of rough games, obviously, Wilson, their quarterback, not being completely healthy. Do you think Utah gets any extra motivation going into this game, or do you think they're going to be, after this game, you're going to be writing off their season pretty quickly?
Well, I think you've kind of already written them off, at least from a conference championship perspective. They're now 3 games behind Arizona State. Of course, they could make that 2 games back with the win with 3 to go. But yeah, they haven't won a game since they beat Stanford, and really they had 2 teams that hadn't looked very good and made them look really good in Arizona and USC. So I'm not sure what's going on with Utah. I think it was pretty easy to get in that bandwagon there, but the only win they've had in conference has been over Stanford, and they've lost to Oregon State, UCLA, Arizona, and USC, who are all decent teams. I mean, they have a tough schedule here. Looking ahead, their final 2 games are finally against doormats Washington State and Colorado, but then their next 2 games are Arizona State and Oregon. So you kind of feel bad for the Utes here, who could end up 4-6 entering the last 2 games of the regular season. But yeah, I think Arizona State has really found a rhythm, and to me is kind of the dark horse to perhaps dethrone Oregon this year in that conference championship game. I know Oregon doesn't play Arizona State unless it's in the conference championship game, but the last 3 games have been absolute massacres. They've scored over 50 points and allowed an average of about 20. So I think Arizona State rolls and rolls pretty handily. I'm going to take them 49 to 24.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you in terms of Arizona State winning that game. I think this is just part of a downhill swoon for Utah, and unfortunately, the toughness of their schedule has caught up to them, and at least they'll have a chance for that bowl eligibility with 2 doormats there at the end of the season, like you mentioned. So that's good for that program to look forward to and build on. I'm sure they're not going to roll over for Arizona State. You look at Arizona State, even in losses, they're putting up a lot of points, and that's just something that's going to be tough for Utah to keep up with. I'm looking more forward to Arizona State's last 2 games here coming up, or their next 2, excuse me, against Oregon State at home, and then you've got that big matchup, potentially very big matchup with UCLA there with 2 weeks left to go in the season. They're at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, and that could decide your Pac-12 South champion at that time. Those are the games I'm looking forward to. I expect Arizona State to win this one. I will say they hang up 38 points to Utah's 17. And we'll move on to the 5 o'clock game Saturday night, Washington and Colorado. Washington, again, gifted with another doormat team. After I believe 2 weeks ago they had California at home, and now this week they'll get Colorado. This should be another academic win for Washington, but again, another season full of disappointments. They look to be going towards 7-5 still. Does Washington use this game as a way to psych themselves up for their stretch run, or do you think they even have that ability and going forward?
Well, I'm not sure they have the ability, but I don't think Colorado poses much of a challenge, although I was impressed with the way the Buffaloes, I know the final score was pretty lopsided, but they played UCLA pretty well, especially in that first half, considering, obviously UCLA is coming off playing Oregon, which is difficult, and probably had a lot of emotion on the line there, tough loss, have to turn around and play, a game the next week against a team that no one really considers much of, but Colorado actually played them pretty well. But yeah, I don't see Washington struggling here much, and frankly, I think it's, again, pretty one-sided. It's kind of a weird week here besides the first game. I guess it's kind of a game of interesting games at the bookends here because we have Oregon and Stanford with the opener, and then the finale, which we'll get to in a second, UCLA and Arizona should also be pretty interesting. But I take Washington to win this one. We'll take them 52-17.
When I'm looking at their last game against California, 41-17 victory there. They've got ASU, or I believe they have UCLA coming up on the docket on the road following Colorado there. And then, yes, they have Oregon State on the road right after that. 2 daunting games, though. I guess the Oregon State game is looking a little bit more favorable towards them if they can build any sort of momentum. You use these games for confidence builder. 28-point favorite, you should win and win easy. You should jump out to a big game. I don't know if they've got 50 in them. They definitely have shown at times that they do have that kind of offensive firepower, but I'm going to go a little lower there. I'm going to take it kind of closer to what that Cal game was. I'm going to take a 42-20 game. Washington wins. And we'll go with the nightcap game here, 7 o'clock. Number 16 UCLA travels down to Tucson. UCLA listed here as only a 1-point favorite on the road. Obviously having a tough time with Stanford and Oregon the last couple of weeks prior, but then of course this past week getting a chance to rough up Colorado a little bit. Will they be able to take that momentum into Arizona and escape, or do you see a possible upset here with a 6-2 Arizona team that might be building a little bit momentum going forward?
Well, I'm not sure how much of an upset it would be. I know in the standings, obviously UCLA is given more credit. In the rankings, UCLA is given more credit than Arizona, but the Wildcats have won 3 in a row, while UCLA has lost 2 of their last 3, so that has to be put into consideration here. I know UCLA didn't play particularly well at Cal or really at Colorado, but they've won their last 3 games here, and maybe, just maybe, Rich Rod's team is doing what I kind of anticipated they would do this year. These 2 teams are in a 3-way tie with USC behind Arizona State in the Pac-12 South, so there are some postseason and conference championship ramifications in play here, so I'd be very curious to see how that plays out. and really this is the only game with the exception of the Stanford and an Oregon game that doesn't have a very clear a victor. You look at this one, and I think this could go either way. I haven't been particularly impressed with Hundley the last 3 weeks. Especially in those in that Oregon loss and the Stanford loss, looked a little bit better against worse competition against Colorado. But Arizona will test them, and I think that's going to be a pretty competitive game all the way through. And I'm going to take my Wildcats just to be different.
Back on the bandwagon.
And also to get back on my Wildcat bandwagon. I don't know what it is about my Wildcats, but I just can't quit them. And I'll take them 44-38.
All right. Well, that's where I'm going to differ with you. I just think Arizona.
I thought you would.
And I was kind of glad because I thought we were going to go in there all five. I have UCLA in this game. You just look at what Arizona's been able to do, and while 6-2 looks great, you look their wins against Utah, who's trending down. They caught them a couple weeks ago. Utah now trending downward. Colorado and California have been largely doormats for most of the year. Didn't really face a challenge too much in non-conference schedule, and then lost pretty handily to Washington, and had a close game against USC. I remember we split on that one as well, back when both teams kind of seemed to be in the same position, trying to figure out where they were going. I commend Arizona for turning it around. Like you, I'm a big Rich Rodriguez fan and what he's able to do, and I think if he gets enough time, they will be able to do something there. That being said, I expect UCLA to kind of jump back into things. I think they're still the leader for the Pac-12 South right now. I expect them to take this game. I'll take a 28-21 victory on the road in Tucson, and I think that's going to wrap up the predictions for this week. So keep tabs on it next week when we reveal the results.
Should we not mention our results from the week before?
Well, since we missed last week, we're going by the week before's, as you mentioned. Eric, you finished 4-1. I finished 5-0. Of course, we came to a difference on I believe it was a Utah USC game.
Those damn Utes.
The Utes were not able to pull it out. Again, there's something. Orgeron knows how to give one heck of a speech or something. He's rallied that team together pretty well over the last couple of weeks. I think USC's been one of the fun things to watch as they start to, I guess, develop some sort of an offensive identity going forward. And it should be a fun final 4 weeks here as we wind down the Pac-12 schedule towards the Pac-12 championship game, which will take place that first week of December.
What did my loss there, which is probably my first loss this season, where does that affect our season rankings?
Right now, the season rankings now put me at 28-10. You're at 26-12.
I think someone's been doctoring these numbers.
You are more than welcome to go back and listen to each of the podcasts, my friend.
My dad's an accountant. Can you please send him your? You
want to do an audit?
Yeah, I'd like him to audit these numbers because I don't know if I buy them.
An auditory audit. There you go. Well, I'm telling you, man, I do everything by the book, so you're more than welcome to take a look at it. But yeah, we're gonna have to. We still got 4 weeks, Eric. If you're looking to jump back into it, so you can start this week. Let's shift gears. I wanted to talk a little bit. Of course, with the week off, that meant there was some recruiting news, and of course, Oregon jumped out in a big way last Monday, getting their 11th verbal commitment in Texas defensive end Justin Hollins out of Arlington, 3-star back a 3-star defensive end. And Greg Powers actually gave me a call to notify Aaron Hardigan and him were kind of tag teaming that commitment. I believe Aaron had video of him giving the news to his school and his team, and kind of a cool moment for him. What Oregon's getting here with Hollins, and having watched him a little bit, I haven't been able to see him in person, obviously, since I can't fly out to Texas for these high school games. But from the highlights I've seen, Oregon's getting a very quick guy, comes off the edge extremely fast, and always finds the quickest angle to the ball. That's something that he's just relentless in terms of the fact that not only can he get off that edge, he's going to at least get the hands in the quarterback's face if he can't come up with the sack or a tackle. And on top of that, he's a guy that has enough of a motor that and watching him, if a play breaks down, he's able to go downfield and still track down the running back, the wide receiver, or whatever. He's vicious with his ball pursuing. So Oregon's getting a really solid prospect here. If you haven't gotten a chance to look at him, go look up his highlights on Huddle. I'm sure we have something on the forums. If not, I will put that up. But again, a big pickup for Oregon is they've now either crossed or about laying at their halfway point for the recruiting class, and we're sitting about 3 weeks away, or excuse me, not 3 weeks, 3 months from signing day. So it's starting to become a little bit more of a factor as high school playoffs start getting closer. And, these kids are going to start scheduling visits, the ones who wanted to wait after the season. You should expect to see some more interesting and fun updates in terms of recruiting, and a lot more of them going forward as kids come to that time to commit.
Anything else besides Hollins' commitment? Any update on some of those visitors? I know we had a couple up there from the UCLA game, obviously some pretty big names. You want to kind of recap a little bit of that? Or
Yes. Actually, what we're going to do here in just a second, I will play caught up with a couple of Northwest prospects today. Kaleb, McGary, and Budda Baker, both uncommitted, both Oregon targets at this point. Obviously, McGary, a big offensive tackle prospect out of the Fife area, and Budda Baker up there in Bellevue, one of the top, actually the top uncommitted player in Washington and the top uncommitted player in the Northwest. We'll play back some of their comments and get an update on them. In terms of the visitors for the University of Oregon versus UCLA game, actually the entire scout crew did a pretty good job of coming together and getting the news that you needed to hear from these kids. We'll start with Monte Nicholson. Brian Doan, the Northeast Regional National Analyst, was able to catch up with him earlier this week. Talked about flying all the way out 3,000 miles. Doan has posted on the boards that he doesn't think Nicholson will come to Oregon just because distance could be a factor. But in listening to what he was able, or in listening to what Nicholson was able to say about his trip, it sounded like it was a great time. He says here that he was able to have breakfast with the players, hang out with Darren Carrington and Kenny Benoit, among others. Got a chance to talk with Coach Helfrich, Coach Scott Frost, and Coach Matt Lubick. Nicholson, we talked about him last week. Very quick, plays both sides of the ball. Oregon looking at him more as a wide receiver. Great agility, great start speed, very fluent with his cuts. Just a very good prospect in terms of Oregon trying to get more out of their wide receivers going forward. They already have Jalen Brown locked down, the lanky wide receiver out of Phoenix, Arizona. And Nicholson would be a nice addition to that, to that roster. But again, it'll be interesting how much distance does play a factor. He's got Michigan State, Pittsburgh, and Florida State up there with the Ducks right now. We'll be keeping an eye on him going forward. I got a chance to talk to both of the committed prospects who were out to the UCLA and Oregon game, Tyrell Crosby, the offensive tackle out of Henderson, Nevada, and Royce Freeman, the running back out of Imperial, California. Both of them had a blast. Both of them had a great time getting a chance to revisit the football performance center that was under construction when they were taking unofficial visits earlier this year during the summer and the spring. Both were wowed by the finished product, and both got a chance to talk to some of those guys that were there, like Nicholson, like John Smith, who also, a big 5-star prospect, according to Greg Biggins' report, had a great time up at Oregon. And that'll be interesting to see how it plays into his decision-making going forward. Smith, to many, is the top guy left here on the West Coast that hasn't committed, and Oregon really would be benefited from a guy who can play both sides of the ball, top defensive back guy, and not only that, a great wide receiver as well. So you got a chance to, if you haven't gotten a chance to read any of those, go on Tail Feathers right now. There's links to each of the stories on there on the front page. And let's transfer over to those interviews that I mentioned earlier, Kaleb McGary and Budda Baker. Both of them, of course, like I said, uncommitted prospects. First, we're going to hear from McGary, what he's been doing. He talks a little bit about his disappointing season, what he's going to be doing going forward, and how he's going to cram his trips in around his basketball season. Just wanted to know what's been going on with your season so far and how that's been going.
Well, season ended couldn't quite get everything to fall into place just right. At this point, we are 5-4. Our last game is this Friday, so we'll either be 5-5 or 6-4. We're not gonna get to the playoffs this year. We got knocked out of them last night. Friday, excuse me. And then as far as the season goes, that's about all there is to tell. I mean,
how about for you personally? Were you able to work on and improve on some of the things that you had been working on over the summer, and also talk about that last game coming up next Friday and how much that's going to mean to you being a senior and wanting to go out on a high note?
It's kind of hard to describe how the last game is going to be. I mean, it's at the same time it's your last game, but it's not for anything. It's just to play, and it sucks. Honestly, it's last time I'm gonna play a football game. But Ellen and Patton were some of the guys I've played football with for a while now, and it sucks.
All right, so shifting gears just a little bit, did want to kind of get since your season's coming to an end, obviously that brings recruiting back into the forefront a little bit. What's been new there, and what's your status with visits going forward, especially now that you'll have a little bit of time on your hands?
I'm going to be a busy bee. So far I want to take a visit to UW, Oregon State, U of O, and Boise State. And I'm kind of swinging between Wisconsin and USC for that last visit spot. I don't have dates. The time set up just yet. That was kind of dependent on how we finished the football season, and obviously not quite like I had planned. So the visits might be taken a little sooner than I had anticipated. But come basketball season, I'm going to be a busy bee.
Obviously, I cover Oregon, so I was just wondering what's the latest with them, how often they're staying in contact, that type of a thing.
I have them every now and then. I think I got a call from them the other night, and I got to give them a call back. After Friday night, I didn't want anything to do with football all yesterday. I was a pretty unsavory character. I wasn't real happy. So I'm going to be making some calls back today. I hear from them fairly regularly, though.
Gotcha. All right, and then last question, do you have any order of the schools? I know you don't have an order in terms of how you want to visit them, but is there one staying on you more than the other at this point?
No, not quite. It's kind of between that top 5 or 6 at this point. I'm still kind of flying by the seat of my pants just a little bit, just because I want to go everywhere, see everything before I decide.
All right, so that was McGary, and we're going to transfer over to Budda Baker. Again, once I mentioned he's the top uncommitted prospect out of the Northwest right now, a safety, slot receiver, special teams, running back, kind of dynamo, kind of the entire package with Baker with a combination of great speed to boot. Here he's going to talk about his visit plans. He had talked about delaying them till after the season. He touches on that, his top 3 to 4 schools, and what his itinerary is going to be going forward once Bellevue's playoff season is over. Let's start talking about your season. How's it? I mean, the last time I talked to you was probably about 2 weeks into the year. Now you guys are off and rolling. Just describe what it's been like for you and how you've been able to develop both with your team and personally.
It's been real humbling because, I haven't been playing a lot because due to the teams are playing, can't be playing the whole game. So I'm most likely be playing like a quarter or so, maybe a half. So it's just taught me to help the young guys and teach them what I know, mostly.
What's that like, having that kind of a new experience where you're kind of limited based on like your team's success?
I definitely want to play, but then again, I know I'll be playing once playoffs comes, which is playoffs is this week. So, I mean, it's just taught me to be humble and just be grateful that I'm even playing football and that I can help these young guys.
And what have you been telling the younger guys on the team and kind of asserting yourself more as a leader? What kind of advice have you been passing down to them to ensure that Bellevue is going to stay a strong program even after you leave?
Oh yeah, I've just been telling them that you got to look at it like this way, that you guys played longer than the starters, so you guys aren't sophomores and juniors anymore. You guys are practically seniors, and that they just need to, take it like this is a championship game, because in the playoffs, who knows if they'll be playing.
All right, so let's shift gears real quick. I got to ask a little bit about recruiting. Who's been in contact with you the most frequently as of late, and have you narrowed things down?
I've been talking to Oregon a lot, Washington, UCLA, so those are my top three, and then ASU, they're in there as well. They were at my game on Friday, which is good, and I talked to Coach Ship. He's like the D-line coach, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you got a top three, and then there's another school kind of hanging around there. I know you said you were going to wait to take your visits until after the season, which I guess now coming up could be at any point. But assuming that you guys do make a run in the playoffs there, have you looked ahead to maybe when you'd be taking the visits, and will it be a difficult time crunch to try and squeeze all that in before signing day?
No, I don't think so. I mean, State's December 6th, so I'll be taking them in December, and then I'll have January and then February. So, I mean, I'm still trying to take unofficials to colleges, so I feel like there won't be a squeeze.
What are some of those unofficials you're looking at taking?
Oregon and UCLA. I've been to Washington plenty of times, a lot of times. I'll still probably go there because, it's like 30 minutes away from my house. And I'm just most likely trying to get down to the schools that I haven't been down to.
Gotcha. And then in terms of official visits, I'm assuming you're planning those top three, and then would ASU get a visit as well?
Yeah, and then I'll leave my fifth one open.
And
I don't really have a fifth.
Okay, are you planning on taking a fifth? I know that A&M was at least a couple months back. We're hanging around there. Do you have a fifth in mind, or would you leave it at four if that be?
Fifth in mind.
Okay.
Really.
All right, and then talk about just now back to high school real quick. Just playoffs coming up. It's your senior year. What does this mean to you, knowing that every game really does matter at this point, because this is going to be the last time you're going to be playing for Bellevue?
It means a lot to me. For me, it's just I want to leave a legacy for myself that I've never quitted on any play. I've never take any play off. So I'm just focused on doing my hardest on every single play. And if I need to tap out so I can get a rest, and I'll tap out because I don't want to be giving not a lot of effort on a play that I know I shouldn't have been in on.
Right. All right. And then last two questions, I'm going to make them more specific about Oregon, just because of what we cover. Just who's been the one in contact with you most frequently, and about how often are you talking to them?
I talked to Coach Lubick, the wide receivers coach, and I've talked to him probably like 3 times a week, like Twitter and all that. But I talk to him like once a week.
Right.
And I called Coach O'Neill because you can only get one coach to call you. So I call Coach O'Neill, and then Coach Lubick calls me sometimes.
Okay, and then I'm assuming that means that they're still interested in you on both sides of the ball there. Is one side coming at you more than the other, and have they described to you what kind of a, I guess, asset or weapon or what you could be in Oregon's system?
They practically come in as an athlete. They told me they want me to choose myself when I get there, or if I was there. So they don't really tell me what position they want me. They just said you choose what you like to do.
So that was Budda Baker, obviously uncommitted. Robby, what's your take for both McGary and Baker's recruitment going forward? I know these are two guys that we've had the opportunity to see a couple times in person, obviously at the NFTC, and with both of them being there, and then obviously Baker was up at the opening. What are your takeaways from both these guys right now?
With Baker, I think you got a better shot. With McGary, he was that guy that started off pretty hot. I remember he was one of the first guys I talked to during this when the recruiting cycle reset there. I believe in February, March is when I first talked to him. And it seemed like he was going to be, and I remember Steve Summers, our publisher, even saying that he's kind of that typical Oregon, the kid that Oregon would want in terms of build, frame, ability, footwork, just everything he was able to do. And it just seems like and you heard those comments where he initially said that he was talking to Oregon. He heard from him every once in a while. Oregon got in contact with him on Friday night. But, of course, McGary suffering that loss with his high school team did not want to talk. I get the sense that, Oregon probably won't end up with McGary unless they put more of a push onto him. And really, if McGary wants to take Oregon even more seriously, because he's talked about visiting Oregon a few times now and tried to make down trips, and really he hasn't been able to make the time. Other things have come up at the NFTC. We mentioned, we're not taking a shot at him here, but it looked like he kind of his mind was somewhere else, and he just really hasn't looked like a guy who was super excited to be in Eugene. On the flip side, Baker, he's always talked highly of Oregon, and while Washington's going to be a player, I think Baker wants to end up with the best possible team. He's already on a pretty stacked Bellevue team. Talks and sounds like a guy who you can develop into a leader, kind of mold into that type of a player. And again, with his ability to play on both sides of the ball, special teams and everything, I think that's something Oregon covets, especially with their system. They like those athletes that can kind of do it all, similar to what a DeAnthony Thomas can do. You can kind of throw him out there and use him in dynamic ways, and that's something that Baker would be able to do. The fact that they're giving him the option of whether or not he wants to play on offense or defense, I think also gives a sign that Oregon really does trust his ability and really does want him in their program. The tough thing is going to be able to get him to take that visit. He tried to take I believe it was an unofficial early on in the season, and his ride bailed on him. So getting him, if he wants to visit everywhere twice, like it sounded like he was indicating in that interview, Oregon's going to have possibly a couple opportunities to impress him and wow him, and it might come down to timing of the visit and when Baker ends up making his decision. I got to imagine it's closer to signing day at this point, especially depending on how far Bellevue goes in the playoffs. But again, that's my feeling right now is Baker would be the more likely of the two becoming a Duck if I had to pick.
That's probably fair enough, and I think that's kind of the feeling I got listening to the audio as well, Robbie. Anything else that stands out from this week? Thanks for grabbing those interviews.
Hey, you challenged me, man. I had to do it. But no, I just think we've got quite a bit of news up on the boards. And if we went through just a ton of it, it would take 2 hours to get through. I think you can also check out Greg Biggins' report of Braden Eggert coming out to visit Oregon. I would look at that. I'm trying to get some more updates for those who've been asking. I saw some inquiries about Henry Mondo, what his status is. I've been trying to get in contact with him the last couple of days, and it's been kind of hit and miss in terms of trying to get him on the phone, as it has been really for the past few months. So if I get anything, I'll post it on the boards as soon as possible. Also, we'll be looking forward ahead to the Utah visits coming up. Of course, that game's in 2 weeks. Oregon right now focused more on that short week, getting prepared for Stanford. So in terms of recruiting news, expect a few updates. Also, I put this week, but probably expect more, I would think, after Oregon gets back, has the weekend to kind of go over some things and get prepared to bring in some more kids for that Utah game. The last thing I do want to mention with recruiting is I put together a somewhat pretty, a giant comprehensive look at the recruiting class and what they've been able to do and what it is going forward. Touch on the defensive backs and the defensive line class that they've been able to bring in and what that could potentially be. Those are looking like the highlights of the class right now. You got to give Ron Aiken credit for what he's been able to build right now so far, and it could get better going forward. Go ahead, read that, give your comments, and please participate on the boards and participate in all the discussion, because there's a lot of great things going on. Oh, Eric, I see you raising your hand there. You got something you want to talk about?
Yeah, yes, teacher. Can I talk now?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't try to at least bring up the Oregon basketball season, which is just underway. They've played 2 exhibition games and now head halfway or maybe all the way around the world to South Korea with a pretty premier season opener against the Georgetown Hoyas at Camp Patterson or Humphreys. I think it's Humphreys in South Korea. Needless to say, I won't be there, so it probably doesn't matter. But Oregon playing Georgetown, check that out. That will be on ESPN this Friday. Worth a view. Oregon has looked pretty good so far in their first exhibition game, especially ranked 19th in the preseason polls. So check them out. Also worth mentioning a couple of Oregon basketball commitments in the front court, which actually Oregon could really use with this team, which is very guard heavy but lacks kind of interior guys. But Oregon was able to pick up a couple of front court players in the last couple of weeks here. I don't think we've mentioned either of them, so I'll jump into it here. But Ray Kasongo from Canada has committed to Oregon. Kasongo has 4 years of eligibility, was considered to be the top prospect in Canada for this class, so really a nice pickup there. He's an interior guy, about 6'9", 250. There's some good YouTube video out there worth watching of him to kind of get a feeling for what he'll bring to the table in Eugene. He committed about just over a week ago, and then Oregon hosted junior college teammate of Elgin Cook's, Michael Chandler, for the UCLA game. Chandler kind of fits the Tony Woods, Waverly Austin mold in terms of their build. He's about 6'10", 235. I've seen him listed a little taller than that at places. Considered to be one of the top interior players in the entire class in terms of junior college guys. So really another nice pickup for the Ducks offensively there. In a big place of need, I think Oregon really, like I said, could use either one of these guys this year because they're very thin in the front court for this season. But obviously going forward, another opportunity to build off of their success and hopefully get that interior game back in flux next season. That's pretty much all we've got in terms of the basketball stuff. I know there were some other visitors that have been here, and there might be some more basketball recruiting info coming forward, and we'll be sure to update you on that when it arises. And, of course, do check out the Ducks this Friday on ESPN against Georgetown. We'll have more information on the boards about that, which figures to be, like I said, a very premier matchup between two teams that should figure into making a nice tournament run this year.
Yeah, that's going to be a game. That's going to be the one thing I'm going to be watching, and that should be a nice little palate cleanser between those Thursday night football games, and then, of course, Alabama LSU happening on Saturday. It's really setting up for a fun weekend of sports, and Oregon's right in the thick of it. Want to mention real quick, Eric, you will be down there with Steve Summers, our publisher, at the Stanford game, so please check Twitter. I'll be manning the booth from Portland here, but you'll be down there firsthand. So please follow Eric and Steve for some firsthand accounts from down there. Hopefully, we'll see what's going on with the podcast. Whether or not we'll be able to get Eric on there, we're definitely going to do our best. If not, we're hoping to get some post game coverage at least a little bit as well, and we'll definitely have something for you following Thursday night's game between Oregon and Stanford. Just keep following us this week. I'm at Rob _eDuck. He's at Erik _Scopel. I believe we're going to wrap this one up here. Longer podcast, but we had a week off and we had a lot to talk about. So let's let Heavy Heaters take you home for the 31st edition of the eDuck podcast. I'm Robbie Boydston.
Scopel out.